Pretty Girl Club. So today I want to talk about the difference between exotic versus exotical. So being exotic just means that you are viewed as different or you look different than the people you're around. So being exotic, I would say that that is subjective. It's definitely subjective depending on geographical location. So anybody of any race or any complexion or hair texture can be exotic. So exoticals are the women on YouTube specifically who are a part of the exotical group or sector. And one thing that all exoticals have in common is we have experienced jealousy and animosity directly from unambiguous black men and women due to the differences in our phenotype. Okay, so that's one of the main differences between exotic versus exotical. Another difference between exotic versus exotical is in terms of the pretty privileged conversation. Exoticals, as per my definition on this channel, which is women who they are mixed or they look mixed, and generally speaking, that just means you are benefiting from one or more isms. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, please check out my 4-part What is an Exotical series. But another difference is in terms of the pretty privileged conversation, exoticals have directly experienced jealousy and animosity due to having pretty privilege and being perceived as more fluid or being perceived as different than unambiguous black people. So that's another difference between exotic versus exotical. Number 3, the word exotical itself was a silly term that unambiguous people coined in order to make fun of the women that they perceived as benefiting from the isms. And this is back when the colorism conversation and kind of that inferiority complex content was dominating YouTube. So that's another difference between exotical versus simply being exotic. Another thing that I feel makes you an exotical is you interact with other exoticals and you support other exoticals. So if you see people on YouTube, whether they are like if they're calling themselves an exotical and then they don't support any other exoticals or like they don't like us or they don't like talk to any of the other girls on here, not just myself, you don't have to like me, you don't have to like all of us, but I have noticed that we also have similar personality traits in the sense that we know how to collaborate. And I think a part of this comes from our fluid identities. A lot of us are very adaptable. We know how to get along in any space. So if you see somebody using that terminology exotical, but like you don't see them interacting with other exoticals, you don't see them saying anything positive about any exoticals, they don't even show images of exoticals on their YouTube channel, I don't consider them an exotical then. And I don't know if my YouTube video is going to be out by the time that I create this, but I made a video where I called out content creators by name and I showed examples of what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's another difference between simply being exotic, as in looking different, because technically everybody looks different from somebody. So it's not special if everybody has it, right? It's not special if everybody does it. So I really do feel like sometimes people almost gaslight exoticals by saying, well, anybody can be exotic. Anybody can do this. Anybody can do that. Anybody can have that. Anybody can be pretty. It's like, okay, we understand that, but we created our own specific niche on YouTube so that we can talk about the nuances of our experiences with blackness because we got kicked out of the BWE spaces. So we got kicked out of those spaces and we do not resonate with like the divestment space. I would say for the most part, we don't really resonate with that because I really do feel like a lot of divestors are really black male centered women who hate mixed race women because the mixed race women were the preferences of black men or whatever. So that's another aspect of being an exotical. It's feeling ostracized or feeling othered because of your identity, but then at the same time, you don't resonate with putting other races on a pedestal because you have close proximity to so many other racial mixtures and ethnic groups already to the point where you don't have to put them on a pedestal. Like, oh, this guy's white. It's like, okay, you're already part white, or maybe you look like you're part white, or their skin tone, maybe you're monoracial, but your skin tone is only a couple shades off from white, or you know what I mean? So you don't exotify non-black people. That's another concept that we talk about over here in the exotical spaces. Exoticals don't exotify non-black people. And so therefore we don't put them on a pedestal. And so for the people who say, well, you're not an exotical because you don't look white, a real exotical would never say that. A girl who is an actual exotical, who identifies as an exotical, would never even say that because she decenters whiteness. She doesn't put whiteness on a pedestal because she already has ambiguity in her phenotype. And so some of her experiences overlap already with women who are half white or women who are half Asian or women who are half native. So that's one thing that an actual exotical would never say. Well, you don't even look like you're part Asian. You don't even look like this. It's like we don't put whiteness and like other races on pedestals like how they do in the divestment movement. So that's another difference between simply being exotic, looking different, versus an exotical. Exotical, whenever I use that phrase, I'm talking about this movement on YouTube that is based on all of the exotical content creators. That's what I'm talking about when I use the term exotical. And also, over the years, I've created all of these images and posters of different celebrities and stuff to show examples of what I'm talking about. But I feel like if you've been following this channel, you already know what I'm talking about. So basically, you are accused of benefiting from colorism, texturism, or featureism, or you may benefit from more than one. But yeah, that's the difference between exotic versus exotical. The difference is you look different than an unambiguous, monoracial, dark skinned black woman with 4C hair. That's the one thing that all of us have in common, is that we do not have these three qualities at the same time: dark skin, 4C hair, and broad features. That's the one thing that all exoticals have in common. We don't have those features all at the same time. We may have one of those features or two of those qualities, but it's never all three. So what separates us from unambiguous black women, it's literally how we look. We standardize this space based on what unambiguous black women said. They said that we are not the real black women or not the real blueprint or whatever. Okay. So why is it that suddenly, ever since we created our own space and now that we're popping on YouTube, now that this channel has gained over 1 million views in the last 90 days, and now that we've got multiple content creators with 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 subscribers, now suddenly people want to try to downplay it like, oh, this is not a big deal. Anybody can be this. Anybody can be that. No, anybody cannot be an exotical in terms of what we are talking about here on YouTube. And I'm never changing that, by the way. So as far as what other people say or do on their channels, that's totally fine. I don't have a problem with that. Like if other people, especially if they're from different countries or if they have their own opinions on what the word exotical means to them, that's totally fine. Or if they're an ally with the exotical movement on YouTube, if they're an ally, then that's totally fine. But if they're just coming along and trying to talk shit and trying to downplay our entire movement, that is somebody that is just literally jealous of the fact that we are gaining traction and that people are listening to us. And so they're coming in and they're minimizing the exotical experience. I feel like that's the one thing that really bonds us together is our experience. We have privilege. Okay, that's another aspect of being an exotical. You could be exotic and not have privilege. Unambiguous black women are the definition of exotic women who feel like they don't have privilege in certain scenarios. They talk about it all the time. Just go ask them. They talk about colorism, texturism, and featureism taking away whatever exotic privilege they would have had. And so that's another difference between exotic versus exotical. Exotic women or exotic people, they're just people who look different. And so they may or may not have exotic privilege. Sometimes they may get made fun of, as a lot of unambiguous women talk about. They talk about being made fun of, or they talk about being perceived as regular or average within their own communities. It's the exact opposite experience for exoticals. We're not viewed as regular in the black community. And yeah, you guys might try to humble us, like unambiguous women. They may try to say, well, you just look like a regular black woman. Okay, well, when we walk down the street, like for example, I've never been profiled by the police or whatever. Or like had somebody pull me over and like accuse me of something that I didn't do. Or I don't know, I just feel like another difference is we don't share the same traumas as unambiguous black women. Okay? So that's another difference between exotic versus exotical. You can be exotic and have the same traumas as unambiguous black women. But exoticals, we don't share the same traumas and the same psychological. We don't share the same mindset as a lot of unambiguous Black women. We don't have the same mental barriers that a lot of them have as a culture. I'm talking about culturally, by the way. I'm not talking on an individual basis in this video. I'm just saying, generally speaking. And I know there are exceptions, and the exceptions tend to be our allies. And that's fine if you're an actual ally. Another experience that exoticals have is we are perceived as the feminine icons of the unambiguous Black community. But when we were children, a lot of our own Black mothers or fathers discouraged our femininity, or they discouraged us from showing that off because they would tell us that we think we're all that, or we're trying to outshine others. So we've got a whole set of stereotypes that comes with being an exotical. You know how unambiguous Black women have stereotypes, like they have negative stereotypes or whatever? We have other stereotypes as well. We have negative stereotypes, but they're different than the negative stereotypes from unambiguous Black women. So, for example, the negative stereotype that we receive is that we're colorist. That's one of the negative stereotypes against us. A lot of unambiguous Black women, they have a different set of stereotypes against them. Like their stereotype is more so, I don't know, some people think they're masculine or ratchet or jealous or whatever. So they've got a totally different set of negative stereotypes that they're dealing with. And they've also got a different set of privileges or positive stereotypes that they are dealing with. So that's another thing that differentiates exotic, simply looking different, from an exotical, as in this movement on YouTube. It's the difference in stereotypes. It's the difference in mindset. It's the difference in privileges. And I know that there are some privileges that may overlap with exotic women. So, for example, if you're Black or white or whatever other race, you're most likely going to be able to relate to the pretty privilege content. So, yeah, you may be able to relate to that. Or maybe if you are multicultural, or maybe if you're multi-ethnic or something, maybe you can relate to that. But us exoticals, we can relate to the majority of all of the experiences on this channel. We can relate to the majority of this content. So that's another difference. It's being able to relate to exotical content. That's one of the core pieces of being exotical, hence the name. That's why we took that insult and we took it back so that we could identify ourselves on YouTube and also in real life in some cases. I just think it's hilarious how unambiguous dark-skinned Black women wanted their exclusive spaces, but it seems like they only wanted their exclusive spaces as long as there were still exoticals in their spaces. As soon as the exoticals left the unambiguous dark-skinned spaces, the unambiguous dark-skinned women themselves left their own spaces. They left their own colorism conversation that they started. Chrissy's channel's been here long before mine. Paris Milan's channel's been here long before mine. Queen Chama, all these women, they've been here long before me. But as soon as the exoticals decided to leave and say, hey, we're going to do our own conversations, or we're going to talk about our own stuff, then suddenly those creators, some of them got off YouTube, or they stopped talking about colorism altogether, or they tried to brag and approximate themselves to us, as Pink Pill did the other day, where she's like, hi, I'm your mother, exoticals. And I'm like, hi, I'm your replacement, Pink Pill. How you like them apples? And so notice how there's this dichotomy that some unambiguous self-hating women like Pink Pill face, where you want to separate yourself from other unambiguous Black women, because I can tell that Pink Pill does that, but at the same time, she wants to approximate herself to exoticals by saying, hey, I'm your mother. Hey, I just want to brag about the fact that I'm your mother. I'm the mother of the biracial. So that gives me more authority to speak in biracial spaces. That gives me more authority to speak in light-skinned spaces. That gives me authority to speak in exotical spaces. No, it doesn't. So if you want to be our ally and you support exoticals, and maybe you're white or you're Black or whatever, and you get exotified, that's totally fine. But as far as what we mean on YouTube when we use that term, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the combination of all of our experiences. Also, exoticals have a different experience with men versus monoracial Black women, white women, Indian, or whatever. We have a totally different dynamic with men because we get exotified everywhere we go. So I've noticed that some Black women, for example, who say that they're exotic, yeah, you're exotic maybe in some white spaces, I guess, or maybe in some non-Black spaces if they like Black women and they don't give you the negative Black stereotypes, then yes, you would be considered exotic probably. But exoticals, we get exotified in a lot of different spaces. So that's another aspect of being an exotical. It's a multifaceted exotification of your phenotype. We get exotified by black men, by white men, by Asian men, by whatever man you can think of. And I'm not saying every man, but yeah. Something else that exoticals may get told is you're not like other blacks. You don't look like other blacks, or you're lighter than so and so, or, these are things that non black people would tell us when unambiguous black women are not around. They might tell us that maybe they don't date unambiguous dark skinned black women with 4C hair. I've actually heard multiple white men say that. And then I see divested black women getting on Reddit saying, oh, my white boyfriend doesn't like my 4C hair. And I'm like shaking my head thinking, like, what did she think was going to happen? I mean, if he's ignorant about your particular hair texture or your hair type, and especially if he's so ignorant to where he thought your weave was real or something, yeah, he's probably going to be confused because he just doesn't know about it. But yeah, so another difference between exotic women versus exoticals is the traumas that we've had. Exoticals experience what I call pretty girl trauma. We experience a lot of guilt because we benefit from different privileges or isms. Some of us may benefit from one ism or two isms or whatever. We don't believe in hierarchy thinking, so I've never emphasized like how many isms do you benefit from. I think that's idiotic. So, but that's another thing. We don't believe in hierarchical thinking. So, one of the main ways that I know someone's not an exotical is if they promote any sort of hierarchy. If they promote any sort of hierarchical thinking, or if they make any content where it's like, ha ha, he likes me just as much as you, ha ha, I'm just as privileged as you, ha ha, I have more privilege than you in these spaces. Anybody who even talks like that, they're not an exotical because we weren't raised with inferiority complexes. Hierarchy thinking comes from inferiority complex. You cannot have one without the other. So we don't have inferiority complexes about like our blackness over here. We don't view being exotic as a competition over here. So anybody that even makes content talking about, well, I'm viewed as more exotic to white men, that tells me that you view white men as the prize and you view exoticals as your competition for white men. So that's proof that you would not like be an exotical, or you don't identify with the experiences. Another difference between exotic women versus exoticals is we have a different experience with black men in particular. We've been heavily fetishized by black men in a way that's probably different than both white women and unambiguous dark skinned black women. And so we probably wouldn't be able to relate on our experiences with black guys. So that's another difference. Another thing that separates exoticals from exotic women is that exoticals specifically get thrown in and out of blackness. Okay? The term exotic can apply to anyone of any race. Exoticals specifically, we get thrown in and out of unambiguous blackness all the time. Usually on the internet, we get thrown into unambiguous blackness, but we're saying, hey, no, that's not our experience in real life. Unambiguous black women begged us to acknowledge our privileges and benefiting from the isms. They begged us to talk about that, so now we're talking about it. But guess what? We're not giving up any pedestals. We're not here to make ourselves ugly so that somebody else can feel prettier. We're never doing that. And also, we're never getting rid of our YouTube channels. There are over like 50 of us at this point. So we're not going anywhere. It's actually really cool seeing some of the other exoticals like defending our talking points and stuff. Like if somebody comes for me or if somebody comes for another exotical, I will defend them. So we have our own community. That's another thing. Exoticals, we have a newly formed community that we just created within the past 3 years. Exotic women, exotic women have been exotified for centuries, or they can just hang out with other blondes or brunettes or Brazilian women or whatever. They can just go to certain spaces. Maybe they have communities, maybe they don't. I don't know. But exoticals on YouTube, we have a newly formed YouTube community specifically, where we have multiple creators who are leading it. And by the way, this is not a cult, so it's not like I'm the leader and everybody's a follower. No, everybody who creates content within this space is just as much of a leader as I am. So that's another aspect of the exotical experience. We have a newly formed YouTube community where we have decided to create content and finally speak up. So we're really excited right now. And we're enjoying our pretty girl club. And we're all subscribing to each other and, like, I don't know, making videos bouncing off of each other. So that's another unique thing that exoticals have that exotic women do not have. And I'm not saying it like ours is better, because no, anybody can make their own content and talk about being exotic. You could be white and make a video saying, I'm exotic to Hispanic man. You can do that if you want, so it's not like a competition. Being exotic is not a competition. But another thing about exoticals is that I don't want to say it to brag, but it's like we've had so many different privileges throughout our lives to the point where it has affected our personality. Okay? So a lot of people say, you're making your hair your personality trait. You're making your skin tone your personality trait. You're making being mixed your personality trait. Well, that's because the different privileges that come with those things have affected our personal reality to the point where it affects our personality. Your personality is a reflection of your personal reality. And how you look can sometimes determine how people treat you or how they perceive you. So, exoticals' personalities have been affected, usually in a positive way, but sometimes some of us do have like PTSD or like pretty girl trauma, or that's why I talk about decentering men. That's why a lot of exoticals create decentering men content. It's because a lot of us have been targeted. Men want us to become their baby mamas more than anything. They want us to become their wives or their sex toys, or or they want to unalive us, or so that's another aspect of being at exotical specifically. We decenter men literally for our safety versus other women who are decentering men so they can attract a better man. It's two different experiences. So, yeah. Anyway, what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.